Welcome, everyone, to this online service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Whidbey Island. I'm Ruth Richards. Effie Brown, Gary Hattel, and I will be your worship leaders today. We gather this morning to remember our deceased beloveds. Today, we are bringing closer to home a commemorative day that was begun, in this country at least, after the Civil War. It was to be an intentional remembrance of all who had lost their lives in that conflict, and later in all military conflicts. Today, by focusing on people connected to our congregation, we're acknowledging that loss of loved ones, by whatever means, is a painful life event, and that a ritual of remembrance can bring comfort, gratitude, and a bit of peace to the circumstances as well. As a Zoom reminder to regular attendees and guidance for all newcomers, please locate the chat box icon at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. When you click on that to open it, a column will appear on the right side of your window. During joys and sorrows, we will invite you to use this chat box to send your statement to Effie Brown. Aside from this use, please hold off on sending messages through the chat box during the service, as it can be something of a distraction. And on our calendar is the upcoming Flower Communion service on June 7th, with Emily in the virtual pulpit. You are invited to add to the service with your photo and flower. Please read all the details in the e-news. Let's light our chalice now with words from Viola Abbott. As we light the chalice and fully embrace the sacred space created here this morning, please hold in your hearts the Unitarian Universalist principle, which calls upon us to respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Today, we remember those who share this earth with us no longer. We bear witness to their lives and the roles they have played in ours. We pay homage to and make stronger that web which connects us all. Please join me in speaking our affirmation which will appear on your screen. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its practice. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. Our mother had a close friend named Betty when my sister and I were growing up. Their friendship grew from two strands that ran through each of their lives. They loved to sing, and they had both been divorced. Betty hadn't had children of her own, so enjoyed her connection to my sisters and my youthful exuberance, and fed our curiosity about what grown-ups knew. She wasn't sentimental at all, instead very matter-of-fact, and not overly revealing of those adulthood mysteries, but still kind to us and always fair. As we grew up and left home, those strands that linked us to Betty frayed for a decade or two. Eventually, though, we recognized the value of our past ties to those important people who were a part of our lives. So we sought to repair the weakened threads. Betty had retired by then and moved from Maine to a retirement community in New Hampshire. We made arrangements for a visit and spent a lovely afternoon with her. During our time together, we talked about her plans for aging and discussed what help she might need, particularly since she had no family left. I lived only a few hours away in Vermont, so I agreed to serve as her power of attorney when the time came. We set up the POA, the months went by, and I visited her when I could. A couple of years later, that time came. Betty needed help managing things and asked me to take on the responsibility of paying her bills. I was so happy to be able to help, particularly since I hadn't been able to visit as often as I would have liked. 2 months after my most recent visit, she contacted me to let me know that she had made the decision to go into hospice care. I went to see her as soon as I could, and so began my education about hospice and the experience of dying. I had lost all 4 grandparents by then, but was very young at the time of their deaths. I was sad, of course, and I really missed them, but I didn't understand death, and I certainly did not understand the dying process. Betty's dying was the closest I had been to this experience. Not long afterwards, I got a call from the hospice nurse. Betty was not conscious. When I arrived, the nurse took me aside and asked, "You do know that Betty is actively dying?" I was stunned. This was a term I had never heard before, and I scrambled to make sense of it. As I walked into her room, I saw that her nurse had invited in 3 Native American musicians who were chanting quietly and playing soft music at her bedside, helping to guide her soul. I stayed to listen until they left, then sat by Betty's bedside and watched her in silence, thinking about the term actively dying. 2 words that I don't know as I would ever have put together before this. I felt deeply grateful to have been invited into her life at this tender, vulnerable time. I drove home that evening with a tangle of emotions and memories filling my mind as I thought about Betty, once so active and alive, and now actively dying. 2 days later, I got the call that Betty had died. Juxtaposing this finality with my wish that her death would never have happened in the first place put me off balance. I wanted a chance to redo the past, to have spent more time with Betty, to have built a deeper bond with her. What a huge life lesson she offered me. Dr. Vivek Murthy, the US Surgeon General appointed during President Obama's second term, and subsequently relieved of his duties in 2017 by the current office holder, speaks to this lesson that I had just learned. He writes, "In the final moments, when only the most meaningful strands of life remain, it's really our human connections that rise to the top. That's the clarity we get at the end of life." But it was my parents who taught me from the earliest age that we don't have to wait until the end of life in order to recognize and to act on the power of connection. I now believe 3 things. Dr. Murthy's parents were right, that it takes a lot of work on many levels to be able to weave that truth fully into one's self and behaviors in one's life. And finally, that it is so well worth the effort.
Thank you, Ruth. This reading, For Those Who Have Lost by James Miller, feels especially appropriate as we remember those who have passed, as well as the losses that have happened as a result of this COVID-19 virus. There's no denying it. It is sad to lose something or someone that we love. I believe that there is a time of loss, is a time of learning like no other. I believe that loss is about beginnings as well as about endings. In the act of losing, there is something to be found. In the act of letting go, there is something to be held. In the act of saying goodbye, there is a hello to be heard. I believe in the promising paradoxes of loss. In the midst of darkness, light will come. In the midst of despair, hope will appear. Within deep loneliness, there can dwell a great love. Finally, I believe whoever we are and whatever happens to us, we are not alone. We are accompanied day by day. We are held night after night in unconditional and universal love.
This time of health risks, environmental destruction, and divisive political systems, we're all just trying to do our best to look out for one another. I hope you've all received the annual meeting materials sent out by our administrator, Stephanie, this week. Toyin Copeland wrote that our board is considering a proposal to significantly increase UUCWI's financial offerings to the larger community this year as a response to the pandemic. Having heard some heartbreaking and heartwarming stories from a friend who helps out at Good Cheer Food Bank, I think this sounds like a worthy proposal. If your circumstances make it possible to help out those whose lives have been severely impacted by the pandemic, we can start aiding them on a more frequent basis very soon. We'll put the information on your screen for how to make an online offering this week to the general fund. We'll leave it there for a minute so you can note any information that you may need. When our service and coffee time are over and we are filled anew with the joy of seeing one another, head on over to the website and thank you for your offering.
I had 4 grandparents, all from 4 different countries. I was closest to my mother's parents, and the nicest of them was my grandmother. I wrote what I'm about to read a few years ago, so my 31-year-old daughter would know them just a little bit. So this is a memorable glimpse into a very deep woman. It's entitled Mary Kowarski, The Standoff. A personal, poignant glimpse into an everyday story of an everyday life, not grand, but definitely resilient. You knew you were safe when you were with her. You were loved, secure, and special. And as a puny 6-year-old in a rough Brooklyn neighborhood in the 50s, that meant a lot. Because you were so scrawny, the tough teenagers called you pony legs in your short pants and Buster Brown shoes, and tease you constantly and mercilessly unless you were with Gran. A Ukrainian immigrant, her first language was Yiddish, but as an American, she was very proud of her beautiful handwriting in English. I knew her as an indomitable spirit, a safe harbor, and the best cook in the world. Boy, could she make a sponge cake, kreplach, knishes, and blintzes. Her small tenement kitchen was full of the ethnic smells of home. She was about 5'2", immaculate in a dark blue polka dot dress covering her solid frame, topped off with an open, friendly face, short, tightly permed hair tinted just the right shade of blue, punctuated with bright, intelligent eyes that took everything in a glance, and wise in the ways of the world. Aproned over the stove top to catch the hot oil that spit across the kitchen from the heavy iron pans that never seemed to actually hit her, but with perfect aim stung me some 5 feet away at her tiny kitchen table that looked over Brooklyn College several stories down. Harry Belafonte was often on the radio. She loved Harry Belafonte. Walking to Flatbush Avenue with her when you're 6 was the worst. She had lived in the small 1-bedroom apartment all of her adult life. And since she and Pop owned the corner candy store that created a life, for about a dozen of the extended family who all worked shifts there and housed one of the few phones in the neighborhood, along with the pinball machine that the mob insisted stay there, and it had all the papers and comics. It was an oasis in an otherwise alien world for the newcomers who settled after them. So why was it the worst to walk to Flatbush with her? She knew everybody, and I do mean everybody. And each and every one of them needed to stop and talk and talk and talk. But Mary Kovasarski, who became Mary Miller at the age of 20 when she married Yitzhak, was wise in the way of the world and little boys. As a reward for my squirming patience, the first stop was the bakery. Oh no, we didn't actually go in, but we carefully chose the Napoleon with its whipped cream top and the small group of lady fingers pastries for the walk back. Dragging the small two-wheel grocery wagon behind us, we wended our way next to Mr. Horing the butcher with his tin ceiling and sawdust floor to select tonight's chicken after an examination that nearly no one in the world could pass. The lean, always lean pastrami that would be lunch and dinner, and place the order to be wrapped in brown paper for the return trip. Last was the greengrocer, the turnaround for the meat, and the reward at the bakery. That was the ritual, with some variation, several times a week. That was when she wasn't doing her 10-hour shift at the store 6 days a week, raising first my mother, my aunt, babysitting me and my younger brother, housekeeping and cooking and baking, and unknotting my grandfather's muscles as he worked his own full-time shifts in the store, and bricklaying and working the docks and welding, along with his duties as the super in the tenement to reduce the rent. Did I mention she would run down to the subway platform with his lunch or dinner most days and nights to catch him transferring from one job to the other? Hard-boiled eggs, a baked potato, something to save a nickel, and feed her husband who worked 7 days a week, every week. And then there was the time the punk on the bike decided it would be fun to intimidate this 60-year-old woman aged too soon from the erosion of work. To ride smaller and smaller concentric circles on that bike, darting at her with her small grandson clutching her hand in terror. To faint running her over, yelling curses and calling names only because he could. Resolutely, courageously, she marched on, ignoring him and his dangerous contraption until a standoff was inevitable. Imperiously, fearlessly, she held up her hand and warned him off, and yet he charged her again and nearly running over her small grandson. He should have known better, this teenager, who should have shown a little respect. So in a flash, she acted. Darting in with adrenaline-fueled preternatural speed, she thrust a small but sturdy stick in his spokes. Immediately, the bike jolted to a stop. It launched that kid about 10 feet up into the air over the bike's handlebars. You could hear the air go out of that kid all the way to Canarsie. Flat out, unable to breathe for seconds, the kid lay there, stunned and temporarily paralyzed. And then as the air came back into his body again, giving him life, you could feel the agonizing restart of his lungs as they got working again. And then she was on him, first bending over him to shake her finger in his face and warning him that she was neither afraid nor scared. And that was, and I quote, not a way to treat a person. Not that she was old or a grandmother in particular. Oh no, just that this was not a way to treat a person. And then because she was a person and a grandmother, she asked him in her kindest and most concerned tone if he was okay. Helped him to his feet, picked up his bike, dusted him off before briefly hugging him, before resuming her 18-hour day as the core, the hub, and the central force and spirit of her small but vital family working so very hard to survive in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Let us remember those who have been a light to us, honoring our relationships in this ceremony of candlelight and love. As each candle is lighted, you are invited to silently or aloud name those you wish to remember and honor. We light a candle in memory of those who have given us the gift of life itself. We honor those who gave us birth and nurtured us. We remember mothers and fathers, grandparents and great-grandparents, those who have endowed us with heritage and who have loved us. We light a candle in memory of those who have been linked with us in the chain of family life. We remember sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, and cousins. We remember those who have been family by choice, adoptive parents and siblings, step-parents and siblings, and all those who have supported and cherished us. We light a candle in memory of those whom we ourselves have passed on the gift of life. We hold dear to our hearts those we have held in our arms and those we have held in our dreams. We remember children and grandchildren who have gone before us. We remember both those who have lived within the womb and those who have danced upon the earth. We light a candle in memory of those whom we have discovered through the heart and through the eyes of love. We remember those who have brightened our days with affection and lit up our lives with devotion. We remember wives and husbands, dearest lovers and closest friends, those who have opened us to ourselves and to life, as we have opened ourselves to them. We light a candle for those who have walked beside us in so many ways. Remember those friends and associates who have worked with us and played with us. Those who have made our experiences in this world so much more memorable. We remember also those four-footed, winged, and finned ones who have shared our lives and taught us about love and loyalty and joy. And we remember too those who have lost their lives in service to our country. All these we hold in our hearts, and we remember that although we extinguish these flames, when the service is complete, the light of our loved ones' memories and their influence in our lives will not be forgotten. May it be so.
I offer this benediction from John O'Donohue. This will be followed by a musical gift from our friends in Whitby Community Chorus. May you live this day compassionate of heart, clear in word, gracious in awareness, courageous in thought, generous in love. Leslie Takahashi gives us today's closing words, which I paraphrase here. In the daily weave of our lives, those who have died are still strong and guiding threads. They are part of the whole cloth of our lives. For what we love lives on in the way our beloved dead accompany us through life. Their words and wisdom, our guide. Their humor, our relief. Their restless concern for the world, our charge. As I extinguish our chalice, their light shines on through us to the world.